Welcome back to Sal Silvester on the future of leadership. I am Sal Silvester, your host and executive producer. And this season is all about elevating your performance at work by thinking like an elite athlete. Athletes train for events using specific methods, tried and tested methods to enhance their performance. Why wouldn't we do the same as people, as leaders at work? Why shouldn't we think about ourselves as corporate athletes? We've covered so many angles already this season. Your pregame routine, how you rest and recover. We had an episode on nutrition and sleep and emotional intelligence. We looked at leading through change and other leadership topics as it relates to your performance at work. And all of these things are really key, just like what an athlete would consider to perform their best on their playing field. But today, I want to focus on something most leaders overlook because performance isn't just about what you do, it's also about what other people see. And if your colleagues, whether it's your boss, your team members, your peers, or others, if they don't notice or believe that you have changed, then your growth won't translate into real progress at work. In other words, you can't just focus on behavioral change. You also have to change people's perception of you. And that's what we're going to dive into in today's episode. All right, so let's just chat a minute here about why perception matters as a starting point. And there's any number of examples that we could probably take. Maybe as an example, you were hired a few years ago as a manager. You did a great job, and now you've been promoted to vice president. The challenge is one of many challenges. People still may see you as that manager. They still come back to you for those tactical issues, or they don't yet see you as a strategic leader. Or maybe you've recently been promoted from an individual contributor into a management role. Your colleagues, those people who used to be your peers, they may still treat you like one of the gang and not as the leader. Or maybe another example, and we do a lot of work around this in our executive coaching. Maybe you've been working hard on a tendency, like speaking up in meetings, or maybe you are overly passive, or maybe you're overly aggressive. You've put the effort into change. We're used to you interrupting or being overly passive or whatever the tendency is that you have that you're working on. They don't notice it right away. That happens that happens primarily because perception lags the reality, and that lag can hold you back. And we found in our work in Coach Metrics, that's a platform that we created to measure behavioral change, that there's always a lag between when a leader makes a change and when other people perceive that change. And it's often 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Marshall Goldsmith wrote about this in his Harvard Business Review article, Leadership is a Contact Sport, years ago. And he showed that leadership change isn't just about learning new behavior. It's about consistent, visible, repeated contact with people so that they start to believe that you've actually changed. So let's talk about the steps that we employ to help people not just change behavior, but to help them change perception. Again, it could be a tendency that you've been working on. You want people to believe that you've changed that tendency, or it could just be that you're in a new role and you want people to see you in that new role as opposed to seeing you as a person in that previous role. So there's 3 steps. And the first step is name it. The second step is claim it. And the third step is stick with it. Let's go through each of those steps to give you a sense of what you'll have to do to change both perception and behavior. So the first step is name it. Look, you can't shift a perception if you're not clear on what you're trying to change. So in this name it step, this is all about getting really clear on what you're working on. So instead of saying, I want to be a better leader, you need to get precise. I want to delegate more effectively by assigning full ownership of projects instead of jumping back in. Or I want to be more concise in meetings by reducing my speaking time. Or I want to speak up more frequently to demonstrate that I have a point of view. And it can be any number of behaviors that you might be trying to change. Now, in our executive coaching, programs, what we often do is we gather data so the leader can get a sense of how people perceive them. We do this either through an online 360 tool, or sometimes we'll conduct confidential interviews. Sometimes we'll observe the leader at work. The idea is that we need to come to that leader with some data so that they get some insight into where they can get better as a leader. Okay, so that's the first step, is get clear on what you want to focus and what you want to work on. The second step is to claim it. So step one is to name it. Step two is to claim it. And in this step, there's some vulnerability that's involved, because essentially you're going public. You're letting people around you, the people directly impacted by that behavior you're trying to change, you're letting them know what you're working on. So it might sound like this. You might gather people for a specific meeting, or maybe you just do this in the middle of a regular team meeting that you have, and you let your team know, hey, I've realized that I've cut people off in meetings, as an example. I'm working on being a better leader, and I would love your help noticing what I'm doing well. Right? Why does this matter? It matters because if you don't claim it, the people around you won't know what to look for. You'll change, but it's likely that they're going to miss it. So by naming it and claiming it out loud, you're essentially inviting them to update their own internal frame of who you are. Okay. So step one is to name it. What am I working on? What's the goal? What's the behavior that I'm trying to change? Step two is to claim it. Essentially, you're going public with what you're working on. You're letting those people around you know the behavior that you're trying to change. Step three is what we call stick with it. And this third step is really critical to changing perception. And by the way, this is probably the hardest part, because change takes time. And as I mentioned earlier from our coach metrics data, perception change takes even longer, up to 6 months for colleagues to recognize a change that you may have already made as a leader. So think about that for a second. 6 months. That means that you can be working hard, changing your behavior consistently, and you still hear you're the same as you were before. Or maybe you've worked really hard to change a behavior, and then you slip up once and people revert back to how they saw you before. And that's why this third step, stick with it, is so critical. And what happens in this step is you are going to consistently follow up with those people who are impacted by your behaviors, those direct reports, those peers, or others. And once a month or once every 30 to 45 days, you're going to go back to them and you're going to say, hey, this is the behavior I've been working on. What have you noticed over these last 30 days? And what are your recommendations for the next 30 days? Right. So you're asking for both feedback and feed forward. It's going to give you some good ideas on what you can continue to change. And it's also going to remind your stakeholders, we call them supporters in our work. It's going to remind those stakeholders what you are working on. And guess what? 30 days later, you're going to go back to that same group of people. You're going to remind them what you're working on. You're going to ask them for feedback from the last 30 days, and you're going to ask them for ideas and suggestions for the next 30. And you'll continue that month after month after month until people see you differently. And usually that's about 6 months of effort, right? So it takes a while to change perception. And that's what we're doing here. So let me give you an example. Once worked with a leader, well, worked with many leaders in this case, who had a reputation for being pretty blunt and harsh in meetings. He worked hard to shift that behavior. He slowed down, he asked more questions, he checked in with people after maybe tense conversations. But months later, when he did an informal survey and asked his colleagues how he was doing, they just didn't notice anything. He was frustrated because he said, look, I've changed. Why can't they see it? And the reason was simple. People remembered the old him. Like, it was so ingrained in the identity that they attached to this person that they had years of data points in their head, if you will. And he wasn't doing the follow up. He didn't tell them what he was working on. He didn't claim it. He didn't go public with it. And then he wasn't following up every 30 days, again, every 30 days, and again, every 30 days. to ask for their feedback and to ask for their feed forward. That reminder mechanism wasn't there. So 3 steps: name it, claim it, and stick with it. Here's how it works in our coaching process. We built an entire platform and methodology around this called Coach Metrics. And what leaders do is once they identify the area or the behavior that they want to focus on, they get those goals into Coach Metrics, right? So that's the name it step. And then they identify their supporters. Again, those are people who are impacted by their leadership behaviors and they're willing to give them ongoing feedback and feed forward. Again, it could be your peers, it could be your direct reports, it could be maybe others deeper in the organization, it might even be your manager. That's the claim it step. So you're going to go public with those people. And then those supporters receive pulse feedback survey from our Coach Metrics platform every 30 to 45 days. And it gives that leader really good data on how others are perceiving them. It also gives that leader really good ideas on how to continue to change their behavior. We also have a habit tracking mechanism inside of Coach Metrics. So not only is that leader getting data every 30 to 45 days from other people, but they're also tracking their own habits. They're getting nudges on either a daily, weekly, or monthly basis to change something, to remind themselves to continue to work on that behavior. So, look, this is hard work. It takes discipline, it takes some humility, it takes some consistency to change behavior. And it's not easy, but it's possible. And that's what matters. So, as you think about improving your performance at work, remember, you can't just focus on what you feel. I'm going to do a revision on that. So, as you think about improving your performance at work, remember, you can't just focus on what you feel has changed. You need others to feel it and to see it too. It's 3 steps: name it, get crystal clear on the behavior that you're trying to change, claim it, tell other people what you're working on, and then stick with it. Follow up consistently, even when it feels repetitive, even when it feels like a marketing program. That's it, folks. That's how you change not just behavior, but also people's perception of you. And that's when real performance improvement sticks. So remember, you have to do all this stuff we've talked about this season: the sleep, the rest and the recovery, the pre-game routine, the mindfulness, everything that it takes to perform well. But you can't miss out on changing how other people see you. So thanks for joining me today. If this episode resonated with you, share it with a colleague or a team member who's working on their leadership. And stay tuned. We'll continue this season. We have a few more episodes with some interesting content to think like a corporate athlete, even more strategy. I'm going to do that section over. So thanks for joining me today. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with a colleague or a team member. And remember, continue to focus on your performance at work, continue to focus on how others see you, and you'll going to do that section over again. That's it. How you going to do that section over again? I'm going to do that entire closing over again. So as you think about improving your performance at work, remember, you can't just focus on your own behaviors. You need other people to see that you've changed too. 3 steps: name it, get crystal clear on on the behavior that you want to change. Number 2, claim it, tell people what you've been working on. And then step 3, stick with it. Follow up consistently, even when it feels repetitive. That's how you not only change behavior, that's also how you change other people's perception. And that's when real performance improvement sticks. Thanks for joining me today, folks. We've got a final episode coming up for the season on how to improve your performance at work. And I look forward to connecting with you soon.